What's going on, guys? Hope you guys are having an awesome day. Today I wanted to dive deep into the Nightmare Zone and give you guys an in-depth analysis of the minigame, including setups with melee and range, along with some experience rates you guys might be able to expect with different weapons and gear setups. In this video I will prioritize AFK training methods over less optimal or more focus intensive training methods. For those of you who have never seen my videos, I have a Nightmare Zone series where I compare 2 or 3 weapons or gear setups and determine whether or not it's worth to pay for an expensive setup or stay with a budget option. And as you'll notice, this guide was inspired by that very series. As much as I would have loved to include magic in this video, training mage in the Nightmare Zone does not make a lot of sense, as there are so many more viable ways to train the skill, whether that be barraging or using non-combat methods. I'll probably be able to make additional videos comparing such training methods. For reference, my combat stats for this video are 95 attack, 99 strength, and 91 range, but I will do my best to provide a reasonable range of experience for every setup, just so many different levels of players will be able to benefit from this video. Before we get started, guys, this video took quite a while to make, so be sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you'd like to see similar videos in the future. So the first thing we need to discuss are the requirements to use the Nightmare Zone, otherwise this video would not make sense. There's a grand total of 38 quests that provide at least one boss to fight in the Nightmare Zone, with quests such as Desert Treasure providing multiple bosses. Out of these 38, you do need to pick at least 5 of them to complete. In order to maintain consistency and simplicity, I will provide my personal list of quests that would be ideal for both melee and ranged instances. These quests are Vampire Slayer for Count Draenor, The Depths of Despair for the Sand Snake, What Lies Below for King Rold, Mountain Daughter for the Kendall, Lunar Diplomacy for me, The Ascent of Arceus for the Trapped Soul, and optionally In Search of the Myrique for the Skeleton Hellhound. These monsters that I mentioned do not have any special mechanics that would disrupt your training or require any special focus. Now once you have these main quests done and these bosses unlocked, the best way to get to the Nightmare Zone is by using the Nightmare Zone minigame teleport in the grouping tab, which will teleport you right to it. Note that you won't be able to use this teleport unless you've completed at least 5 of those quests from the 38 quest list. Now for ideal instances, you would also need to complete freeing the Mountain Dwarf from Recipe for Disaster in order to get the Rock Cake. This will allow you to lower your HP down to 1 so that you can last so much longer with absorption potions. Optionally, a Locator Orb is a much better option than the Rock Cake, however that requires the completion of Dragon Slayer 2. Once you've arrived at the Nightmare Zone using the teleport, you will notice a businessman by the name of Dominic Onion, and nearby you'll see a bag of money sitting on a rock, which is the coffer you'll need to store money in to pay for instances and dreams. If you guys are planning to use the Nightmare Zone for a significant portion of time and many trips, I would suggest storing several 100,000 GP at once. That way you won't have to keep bringing money every time you want to train combat here. Make sure you unlock the coffer with your bank pin before speaking to Dominic to start your dream. Now within the Nightmare Zone, there are a few options you can choose from, each with a normal and hard version. You have a practice mode and an endurance mode, both involve fighting unlocked bosses one-on-one. Then you have a regular rumble mode and a customizable rumble mode. The regular mode is like endurance mode, where you can fight an assortment of all of the bosses you've unlocked, except this time you can fight up to 4 at once instead of one-on-one. While this is better for XP and Nightmare Zone points, the best mode for experience and points is the customizable rumble, so that's what I'd like to go into the most in this video. A custom rumble will set you back about 22,000 GP for normal mode and 26,000 for hard mode. The main difference between the two is that the bosses in hard mode have a higher attack, strength, and hit point level, but not defense. The additional hit points are especially useful for experience and points training once you build up enough points to get absorption and overload potions. If you've never done the Nightmare Zone before, you may have never heard of these potions, so let me briefly explain them to you. Overload potions cost 1,500 reward points per dose, or about 6,000 for a full potion, and last about 5 minutes per dose. They boost all your combat stats anywhere from 5 to 19 levels, depending on your level, and like Divine Combat Potions, the boosts do not drain in those 5 minutes, which is a big plus. Drinking an overload will damage you 50 hit points over the course of several seconds, hence why an overload requires at least 51 HP in order to use. If you accidentally reduce your HP below 51 before drinking it, you will be unable to take the drink as the potion itself reduces your hit points by 50. If you use the rock cake or locator orb as the overload is reducing your HP, you may accidentally get yourself killed, so please wait until the overload damage is done before finally reducing yourself down to 1 HP. In addition to overload potions, the second potion to stock up on are the absorption potions, and they do exactly what you think they do, and that is absorb damage. Each dose costs 1000 points or 4000 for a full potion, and they will provide 50 absorption points in the top left of your screen per dose. This is why keeping your HP at 1 is so beneficial and crucial, as the max drain an enemy can do to you is 1 damage on your counter. These potions are just as crucial as overloads, as they negate the need for any food. I personally like to drink a few potions so that I have at least 500 to 600 points of absorption on my counter. Now with that being said, let's dive right into how you can obtain your very first Nightmare Zone reward points to access these benefits. When you first start the Nightmare Zone, guys, you will have a grand total of 0 points, and as such will not be able to purchase overload or absorption doses to optimize your training. Now in this situation, I recommend using a setup that has a high prayer bonus, the ideal being a melee proselyte setup. If you want to spend 15 million GP on a Sunfire top and legs, feel free to do so as well, as they do provide a higher prayer bonus. My recommended melee setup would be a Nezi helm or face guard, proselyte top and bottom, an amulet of fury, an abyssal whip, a dragon defender, any type of god blessing, Barrow's gloves, dragon boots, and an unimbued berserker ring, as of course you won't be able to imbue your berserker ring without any points, and a fire cape. Now feel free to upgrade any of these slots with what you can afford, otherwise these pieces can get you a good start. Because you won't have overload potions, you will need to bring 5 or 6 super combat potions at the beginning, and the rest of your inventory can be prayer potions. The reasoning for this setup is that you will be riding protect from melee in this entire instance, and as such a high prayer bonus will allow you to maximize your time here. Now once you have your gear and potions ready to go ahead and select a custom hard rumble and pick at least 5 bosses from your unlocked options. As a reminder from earlier, my recommended bosses are Count Draenor, Sand Snake, Trapped Soul, King Rold, the Kendall, and me. These bosses are relatively easy to unlock in regards to their respective quests. Once you're in the dream, pod up and turn on protect from melee once the enemy starts spawning around you. You can stand wherever you'd like in the Nightmare Zone, however I like to stand in the middle of the room besides the blood splat. The blood splats are potential spawn points for these bosses, so do your best to avoid standing directly on top of them. Once you've done this, all you have to do is sip a prayer potion dose every now and then, as well as drink up your super combat potion once your boosted stats drop significantly. With my recommended setup and stats, I hover close to 80,000 melee XP an hour, and about 250,000 Nightmare Zone points an hour. Now with lower stats and gear, you might get about 70k XP an hour, and maybe around 200,000 Nightmare Zone points along with that. If your gear and stats are better than mine, you might hover close to 90,000 XP an hour, as well as over 300,000 Nightmare Zone points an hour. Now that we've gone over an initial setup to get you guys started, let's talk about some popular melee setups, starting with full Dharok. Dharok is arguably one of the classics when it comes to Nightmare Zone melee training, as it requires 70 attack, strength, and defense for the entire set. However, there are some things to keep in mind if you are using Dharok. The first thing is your hit points level. While Dharok does not have an HP requirement to use, it's highly recommended to at least have 92 hit points in order to get a good value out of the set effect. Essentially, the higher your HP is, the higher you're likely to hit in terms of max hit. The second requirement would be maintaining low hit points. Most of you probably know that the lower your hit points are, the higher you can max with Dharok. With that said, you regenerate about 1 hit point every minute, and so in order to maintain the best DPS with Dharok, you would need to remain relatively active in keeping it that way. The best way to do so is to flick the rapid heal prayer on and off right before you regen 1 HP, so about once per minute. Now because of this, using Dharok may not be the best method to use if you're looking purely to AFK longer, however it can be very rewarding. Here is the setup I would use. So aside from Dharok, the gear setup is pretty basic, with my only best in slot being Ferocious Gloves. If I had to upgrade one piece of gear, it would definitely be getting the Amulet of Rancor over the Amulet of Fury and Torture, as you get a substantially higher experience rate in an hour. This setup without the Rancor will cost about 20 million GP plus a small amount in hourly repair costs for Dharok. With respect to experience rates, you can expect anywhere from 90 to 120,000 melee XP an hour, and an average of 300,000 points in that same time period, depending on your stats and gear. In terms of inventory, I like to carry my locator orb, some overload potions, and absorption potions the rest of the way. Now what about if you don't have 92 hit points or above? While there are still a couple of good solid sets that can get you a respectable amount of melee experience, starting with the full Blood Moon set with the dual Makwa-Widos. This armor set and dual wield weapon combo was released into the game earlier this year as part of the Varlamore update. In order to use it, you will need 70 attack, 75 strength, and 50 defense for all the pieces. The reason why this combination is very sought after is the set effect that the Blood Moon armor can give to the Makwa-Widos. There is a 33% chance of increasing the attack speed of the Makwa-Widos from 4 ticks to 3. With an extremely high crush bonus of 121 and 81 strength bonus, this set actually outperforms the Inquisitor Mace, paired with an Avernic Defender, as well as the Abyssal Bludgeon. With all that being said, it does come at a very premium price. At the time of recording this video, full Blood Moon armor plus the weapon will set you back about 33 million GP, which is over 50% more than the Dharok setup. So with additional pieces like a Fury, Ferocious Gloves, a Berserker Ring, you're looking at about 50 million GP in total. So with this kind of investment, what kind of returns can you expect? Well, for me, I can expect nearly 110,000 melee XP an hour with my stats, and close to 300,000 points. If you have the minimum stats and downgraded support pieces, you may only get around 85,000 experience an hour with closer to 200k points, but if you have higher stats and gear, you may be looking at closer to 120k XP an hour with around 340,000 points. Fortunately, we do have another option for those of you not willing to shell out big time money for a full Blood Moon set, and that would be full Obsidian armor. Like full Blood Moon, this armor is also accompanied by supporting pieces. In this case, it's a Berserker necklace and an Obsidian sword. The all-around set effect is very respectable, with the helmet, body, and legs giving a 10% accuracy and strength bonus to all Obsidian weaponry, and the Berserker necklace providing another 20% stackable damage bonus to Obsidian weaponry. You only need 60 attack to wield the Obsidian sword and 60 defense for the armor. At the time of making this video, my setup with Ferocious Gloves and an imbued Berserker Ring will set you back around 20 million GP, but with the bare minimum setup and all 60 melee stats, you might be looking at only 10 million GP, as you would replace the Ferocious Gloves with Barrow's Gloves. While the cost is much lower than the full Blood Moon setup, so is the range of experience you can get. With all 60 stats, you would hover at around 60,000 melee XP an hour, and with stats in the high 90s and several gear upgrades, you might be looking at a closer to 110,000 melee XP an hour. The points per hour would also vary, ranging between 150k to 300k based on your DPS differences. Unlike full Blood Moon, however, full Obsidian does not degrade, and you save a little bit more on repair costs and inconveniences. Now, so far we've discussed 3 melee sets that you could use, but how about just a general melee setup with no set effects or matching armor? In this setup, I'll go over what I would use if I were to go to the Nightmare Zone with a general melee setup. From top to bottom, I would start with a Nezi face guard, fighter torso, and Bandos Tacets. I like to use Ferocious Gloves, along with an imbued Berserker Ring, Amulet of Fury, Dragon Boots, a Fire Cape, and a Dragon Defender. My choice of weapon could vary a lot, but I do like to use the Abyssal Whip just to keep it classic. This entire setup would cost around 60 million GP and would be significantly more if you decided to go with upgrades like an Avernic Defender or an Amulet of Rancor, or both. With my exact stats, I typically average around 90,000 melee XP an hour on hard mode, but I would estimate a range of anywhere between 70,000 to 100,000 depending on your stats. It could be improved further if you choose to upgrade certain pieces, but then again, you may be better off using a complete set like we've discussed earlier. So guys, when it comes to choosing an ideal melee setup for the Nightmare Zone, there are certain factors you should look at based on your needs and desires. If your goal is to maximize experience, then the Dharok setup will likely be your best bet. However, if your goal is to get a little bit more AFK action, then consider a Blood Moon setup or Obsidian setup, as there's no explicit DPS benefit for remaining on 1 HP unlike Dharok's. Finally, you have your budget constraints. Not everyone has 9 figures worth of cash to throw at high level pieces such as the Rancor and the Avernic Defender, which is why I recommend a middle of the road setup for these sets. The most budget friendly option would be Dharok's and Obsidian, both with nearly identical setup costs. Now from here, at this point, you just need to decide if you'd prefer the lower focus and XP rates of the Obsidian set, or the higher XP but more active Dharok setup. As for the general melee setup, I wouldn't bother using it too much, as the initial prayer setup is better when you first need to accumulate points for the potions, plus it's way more expensive for no real benefit. Now that we've discussed the melee aspect of this video, let's move on to range training. Nightmare Zone is a great place to train range for those of you who don't want to grind out range training through PVM or Slayer. It's also a much cheaper but slower alternative to chinning maniacal monkeys in the Monkey Madness 2 caves. Now, unlike the melee portion of this video where I went through different armor sets, I will only be using regular void armor for the range portion of this video, and we will go through comparisons of the ranged weapons instead. To keep it short, regular void armor performs much better than full Armado and any kind of dragonhide armor, and it can be obtained rather easily through pest control. Other supporting pieces of gear such as the Amulet of Fury, Blessed D'hide boots, Ava's Assembler, and the Imbued Archer's Ring will also remain constant for all these weapons. As for my inventory, I will have my Locator Orbs, several Overload Potions, and the rest filled with Absorption Potions. You may choose Super Ranging Potions over Overloads, however I like the stat preservation of Overloads better as your stats stay the same over 5 minutes. I have chosen this setup as all these pieces are relatively simple and affordable to obtain. The most difficult piece to get in this setup would be Ava's Assembler, as you would need to complete Dragon Slayer 2 and kill Vorkath until he drops his head. As I did earlier, I will try to estimate a range of experience to account for those players with lower stats and gear, as well as those who might have upgraded gear and stats. Before we get into the different weapons that you can use for range, here's a reminder of the bosses that are ideal for a custom rumble. For all of these setups, I will be giving my points and experience rates based on the hard instances and not the normal one. As you guys can see, the bosses are about the same as the melee portion of this video. However, the Sand Snake should be excluded from the Venator Bow setup in the future due to being a 3x3 monster. As a general tip, do not use any bosses that are larger than 2x2 if you are using the Venator Bow, as its passive effect of reflecting off targets will be suppressed on these larger bosses. Alrighty guys, so the first weapon that I'd like to discuss is the Imbued Magic Shortbow with Amethyst arrows. The imbued version costs about 40,000 GP to create using an imbue scroll and only requires level 50 range to equip, making this a very good starter option for those who have a lower range level. The imbued version comes with a range accuracy bonus of 75 compared to 69 for the unimbued version, and is best paired with amethyst arrows, providing a 55 range strength bonus. With 91 range and my setup mentioned earlier, I can get around 80,000 range XP an hour with about 235,000 points, but with much lower stats and gear you may get around 60,000 XP an hour on the lower end with around 150,000 points, or up to 90,000 XP and over 250k points on the higher end of the spectrum. Now let's move on to the Hunter Sunlight Crossbow with Moonlight Antler Bolts. I consider it a direct upgrade from the Imbued Magic Shortbow for many reasons. First, it has level 66 range and level 50 Hunter requirements to use. Secondly, it outperforms the Magic Shortbow in both accuracy and damage with 79 range accuracy and a 60 range strength bonus. The third reason is that it only comes at a cost of 5,000 GP to buy, but most importantly, it is a 3-tick weapon on rapid mode compared to 4 ticks for the MSB. Having that quick of an attack speed combined with higher damage output makes this a no-brainer upgrade from the previous setup. In addition, since it's one-handed, you can also equip a shield item such as a Book of Law or even a Twisted Buckler if you choose. In terms of experience and points, one may expect between 65,000 XP and 160k points, or up to 95,000 XP and over 260k points on the higher end per hour. Now guys, just a reminder that these are estimates and may not be on the dot predictions. The third range weapon I'd like to discuss is the very popular Toxic Blowpipe. With a 75 range requirement to equip, it comes at a very hefty cost of 6 million GP at the time of this video, with over 500k an hour in Zulrah scales on top of that. I will provide a full cost breakdown based on the darts you use, but I personally recommend using adamant darts, especially if you have plans to spend close to 100 hours training here with the Blowpipe. While the Blowpipe only has a 30 range accuracy bonus and 17 strength bonus with adamant darts, it has the fastest attack rate out of all the ranged weapons with a 2-tick rate on rapid mode. Assuming continuous combat, that means you can fire 3,000 darts with a Blowpipe per hour, while only firing 2,000 bolts with a 3-tick weapon like the Hunter Sunlight Crossbow. As a result, you can expect a decent boost in hourly experience. On the lower end, you might be able to get 75,000 range XP and 180k points an hour, and about 100k XP and 280k points on the high end. This will vary depending on the darts you use, but you may reach the 6-figure mark if you use amethyst darts instead of adamant. The fourth and final weapon I'd recommend is of course the cream of the crop when it comes to Nightmare Zone range training, and that is a Venator Bow paired with amethyst arrows. As I mentioned at the start of the range segment, this is the only time I would remove the Sand Snake from your list of bosses, as its massive 3x3 size may prevent the Venator Bow from reflecting its arrows onto nearby enemies. Out of all the previous range weapons we've discussed, the Venator Bow has the highest range level requirement to equip, with a minimum of 80 range. It is known for its passive effect of reflecting arrows from your target to up to 2 more enemies, and because you're constantly surrounded by enemies in the Nightmare Zone, this effect is always active, making for some amazing XP drops. You need to charge the bow with Ancient Essence in order for this effect to work, with an estimated cost of 15,000 GP per hour on rapid mode, in addition to your arrow costs. The bow itself is also the most expensive weapon so far, going for around 90 million GP at the time of this video. This weapon is the only premium weapon you will ever see me recommend to buy just for Nightmare Zone training, because the XP gains are so ridiculously good. With my Void setup from earlier, I was getting 162,000 range XP per hour and nearly 400,000 points in that same time period. Now if you're level 80 range, you will likely hover around 140k range XP an hour and about 350,000 points, and possibly 175,000 XP and 450k points in an hour if you have max range stats and gear. Now let's discuss the operating cost of using these range weapons, as that may play a factor into your decision. I also assume that you will not be going around picking up arrows or darts from the ground, because I know you value your sanity just as much as I do. Let's start with amethyst arrows used by the Venator Bow and magic shortbow. Assuming the use of an Ava's assembler, you will lose around 400 amethyst arrows with the MSB on rapid mode and 300 with the Venator Bow on rapid mode. This comes to a loss of around 65,000 GP and 50k GP respectively. However, the Venator Bow does need 15k GP an hour in Ancient Essence, so if you add that to the 50k, both weapons require equal spending per hour at 65,000 GP. Let's move on to Moonlight Antler bolts, used for the Hunter Sunlight crossbow. On rapid mode, you will fire 2,000 bolts an hour, and at a 20% loss rate for the assembler, you will lose 400 bolts, costing you around 200,000 GP an hour. Now if you have an Ava's accumulator, you can just use a 28% loss rate instead of 20%. In this case, you lose around 560 bolts in an hour, costing around 280,000 GP. If you have a Venator Bow, I assume you also have the assembler by this point. Finally, let's look at the chart for the toxic blowpipe costs. On rapid mode, you will fire 3,000 darts in an hour, and use around 2,000 Zolrath scales in that same time. The scales alone will cost nearly 600,000 GP an hour, but here's a detailed chart showing total cost per dart for both the assembler and accumulator. You can see the sudden jump from adamant to amethyst darts, and while the total cost difference might only be 100k off, that can add up to several millions of GP if you spend a long time in the Nightmare Zone. As for dragon darts, if you have the money to use them for dozens of hours here, you're better off dropping that money on a Venator Bow, or you can just give it to me. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we've reached the final part of this guide, and that's the rewards that you can expect to receive with the millions of points you've gathered so far. There are 3 sections of rewards the Nightmare Zone offers, and that is resources, upgrades, and benefits. Starting with resources, there's nothing too fancy here. The only things worth buying are the herb boxes that can get you about 15k worth of herbs per box, and the scrolls of redirection. These scrolls allow you to alter your teleport to house tablets to locations of other house portals like Taverley or Brimhaven. This is quite useful in terms of quality of life content. Next is the upgrade section, and this is where people spend the most points overall. Here are the items you can imbue with Nightmare Zone points and their respective costs. Usually the most popular items to imbue here are your Slayer Helm, the Salve Amulet, and the Dagonoth King Rings. If by any chance you have completed the hard combat achievements, all of these costs will be cut in half, although by this time you will have most of these items anyways. Finally, we have the benefits section, and this is just a section with the 4 potions that you can use exclusively in the Nightmare Zone. Although the super magic and super ranging potions are offered here, I personally would stick to overloads and absorptions only myself, as the overload boosts never dwindle over 5 minutes. And guys, we've reached the end of this video. I hope you guys found this video very helpful if you're looking to start your journey in the Nightmare Zone. All this content in this video was culminated over my Pay or Stay series and what I've learned from that series. So I hope you guys found this experience helpful, and hopefully you guys can make some great gains in the Nightmare Zone. If you guys want to see guides like this in the future for different combat training methods or locations, please be sure to leave a like on the video, subscribe if you're new to the channel, and let me know in the comment section what type of analysis you'd like to see me do next. That being said, I hope you guys take good care of yourselves, and until next time guys, peace.